photography exhibition entitled Indoors, Experiences of Older People During Lockdown. Can you all hear me? If not, please type frantically in the chat and we will try and sort this out. My name is Nina Hallowell and I'm a researcher in the Wellcome Centre for Ethics and Humanities at the University of Oxford. And I am going to be your host for this event, in which you will hear from the exhibition curators and one of the people who was photographed and interviewed for the project. We thought that now might be a great time to revisit the Indoors exhibition on early experiences of lockdown, because now we've had much more practice at lockdown and hopefully are about to emerge for the final time. And although you can't see it, I'm firmly crossing my fingers and toes at this point. But first, some housekeeping. This event will run for 45 minutes. In the final 10 minutes, we will invite you, the audience, to ask our speakers any questions you may have about the exhibition or to let us know your thoughts about the project. You can do this by typing into the Q&A, which is the speech bubble icon on the bottom of your screen, and I will read out and direct your question to the appropriate person. Just to bear in mind that if you do write a question, that this event is being recorded. So that's the rule of engagements finished with. So now a nod to our sponsors. The photography exhibition we're discussing today was launched last November as part of the Being Human Festival 2020 and is funded by the Wellcome Trust. We are delighted to revisit this work here today and to be part of the Uehiro Centre's Festival of Arguments. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, photographer Adam Isfendiyar. Adam is a documentary photographer who's based in London, and his photographs of people living in lockdown during spring 2020 are the basis for our exhibition. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Nina. And hello, everyone watching this. Thank you for taking the time out to join. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's worked on the exhibition for their hard work and enthusiasm. And I've really enjoyed being a part of the process of bringing my photography and your research together. During the first lockdown, one of the benefits for me was the opportunity to work on a personal project without having to worry about finding work or making money, as that wasn't an option. So I could dedicate all my time and energy to this project. And I love the fact that it's led to projects such as this one with the Wellcome Centre for Ethics and Humanities at Oxford University. There were a number of people who were making comparisons between the lockdown and the Second World War, and May the 8th was the 75th anniversary of VE Day. So I thought it would be interesting to get the perspectives of some survivors of the war. On a personal level, I find the stories of people who lived through that period fascinating. And I was lucky enough to find 6 people who've lived through the war and the lockdown. After speaking on the phone to the participants, who I found mostly through asking for contacts on social media, I went to their homes and took their photos and recorded interviews with them about their experiences, both during the wartime and lockdown. The general consensus seemed to be that the two events were quite different. One of the participants told me off the record, sorry, I'm going to have to stop there for a second because my script has gone. There we go. So the general consensus seemed to be that the two events were quite different. One of the participants told me off the record of the traumatic events during the Blitz that still haunt her. And although many agreed that the lockdown has been more of a struggle than the war, it was also acknowledged that age is a major factor in their experience of both events. Also, there were a variety of different lived experiences of the war, from active servicemen to school children. And the war comparison seemed to be less significant than the current struggles of isolation and lack of connection that many older people were facing and continue to face. As is often the case, old people can get forgotten about, and through this project, it's been clear to me that the older people in the community, many of whom have been unable to go out and connect with friends or family members in ways that they used to, have really suffered from the isolation and fears around health. They're much of the population that we've been trying to protect, but whose lives have become very strained by the measures introduced to protect them and us. I'll now pass over to Peggy, who's one of the participants of the project. Peggy's 96, was born and raised in the East End and currently lives in Bethnal Green. I spoke with her about her lockdown experience, and here's a video of that interview. How did you feel when the first lockdown started?
How did I feel?
Yeah, when the first lockdown started.
I don't remember really. I was very concerned, but not knowing too much about it. I suppose, like everybody else, get on with it and do your best and hope it isn't for long, I suppose.
And what's been difficult for you?
The difficulties that I feel so lonely. I've got to make myself do things. Whereas if I have family here, or even when friends come, or did come, it could be fun. But knowing that nobody's coming in, nobody is going to say, well, come on, let's go out, let's visit here, let's go to Greece, let's go to where you lived for a while, and you know you love Greece. I can't do that even now. Because I'm not really
What was difficult?
Difficulty being alone and having nobody to just put their arm around me and say, you know, it's going to be fine. You've got to tell yourself, you've got to be pretty strong to get through this on your own.
What has helped you?
Food, I think. Food, radio, some reading I did at the beginning. Nothing different, really. Reading, changing my diet. I've started doing cat rescue, that helped me, but really not a lot of difference. I can't say much has helped me because I'm sort of strong in my, I don't sort of weep and say, what can I do? What's happening? I'm all alone. No, it's none of that. I'm proud that I'm the age I am, and I'm sort of pretty well.
What are your thoughts on the lockdown starting tomorrow?
What are my thoughts?
On the second lockdown starting tomorrow?
I sort of got fed up. Well, not again. We shouldn't have this. It should have been handled. And, but then who am I to say who's in charge? The scientists, the people who are all working on some virus, really, they know very little about. Hopefully, now I think that things are moving, and but is that what they're telling us? It will. I don't know if it will ever go. I don't know if it will ever be there. Like the flu. You have the flu, you have a flu jab. The next year you have another flu jab, but you don't seem to get the flu. Well, is this going to be similar to that?
And what do you think people can do to help older and vulnerable people during this time?
Well, just be aware that they need people. People need people. And I think people should make sure that if they see someone who is having difficulty, either mentally or physically or shopping or whatever, even if you go up to them and say, well, is there anything I can do? Do you need some help? Or just chat if that embarrasses you. Just go up, and which I have done. There's a park at Bethnal Green near the station, and there are a couple of old people sit there. And at the beginning, when I was allowed out, sort of between the two viruses, I was walking there, and especially one particular man, quite sort of sad, and I just started talking to him. And he smiled and he said, "Thanks, love." He said, "Thanks." And I thought that was wonderful that people talk to people. And if you feel they need you, be there for them.
Thank you, Adam, for that introduction. And we meant to show you some of the striking images that Adam had taken, and we may actually run those during the Q&A session because we couldn't actually get the slideshow to work at that point. And I'd like to thank Peggy Metaxas also for her moving contribution to this event. I'm sure that you, I realized that the sound went in and out, at least it did a bit for me. So I'm sure that actually if you all go and look at this in the online exhibition, which will be made live a bit later on, you will agree that it is absolutely wonderful to hear her reflections on the first lockdown and the significance of human connection at that time. And I do recall that she mentions food was quite important. And I'm sure we'll all agree that actually eating has been one of our main occupations during many of the lockdowns we've been involved in. Now, much has been said about older communities throughout the pandemic, and I think it is really important to hear about their experiences. And indeed, I'm sure I'll speak for everyone when I say that Adam's photographs and the accompanying stories in the exhibition managed to convey these experiences very powerfully. Now, the layout of the exhibition, as you will all see, is split into 4 key themes with accompanying photographs for each. These themes are isolation, connectedness, coping, and memories. We're now going to hear from 4 researchers from the University of Oxford who developed and co-wrote the text panels for the 4 themes, which reflect aspects of their own research works. First, Associate Professor Mikey Dunn, a bioethicist from the Wellcome Centre for Ethics and Humanities and the Ethics Centre. Mikey, can you tell us a little bit more about the theme of isolation? Thank you.
I certainly can, Nina. Thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon to everybody on the call. I think it's fair to say that the series of lockdowns we've experienced have imposed profound and unexpected changes in our lives, stopping us in our tracks in a whole different range of ways. The basic reality of being locked down can be a disconcerting and troubling experience for all of us. As the American novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald famously put it in The Great Gatsby, the loneliest moment in someone's life is when they are watching the whole world fall apart and all they can do is stare blankly. Lockdown during a pandemic is, by definition, a time of forced physical and social isolation. Now, when we think about people being isolated, we typically think about isolation geographically, people being disconnected or cut off from other people across different locations, from friends, from families, and from the world around us. And when we think about the reason why we should be concerned about physical and social isolation, we tend to identify the negative outcomes that isolation gives rise to. Worse physical and mental health, and the heightened feelings of loneliness, unhappiness, or just being fed up that Peggy highlighted. This can be particularly notable amongst older people who are frequently, though not necessarily, more disconnected from their communities in normal times. And older people might also be under instruction to shield themselves in their homes entirely due to their advancing age and pre-existing health conditions. But as I've argued in my research, there's also another sense in which we can understand social isolation that is ethically important. Instead of thinking about isolation just in terms of being apart from others, we can also understand it in terms of being prevented from doing. And this means that when older people are isolated, they're not able to exercise meaningful opportunities to live their lives in ways that we can all recognize as being valuable and worthy of protection. And understood like this, isolation is an ethical problem that societies as a whole need to address because of the ways in which it fundamentally limits the scope of activities that older adults are able to pursue and choose between. In my view, supporting isolated older adults during a pandemic is a social project, a project that we're all invested in, especially during these periods of lockdown. Members of local communities will need to respond in innovative ways to engage older people in social activities, whether that's through their everyday encounters or interactions as neighbours, as volunteers, or just as strangers passing on the street. This, I think, is the route out of isolation and the path towards a better life or good life for the oldest members of our communities. So thank you, and back to you, Nina. You're on mute, Nina.
I realised that had to happen at least once in this launch, didn't it? Thanks so much, Mikey. I just want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that the link to Adam's photographs and the exhibition is now live in the chat, and we apologise for the technical glitches a bit earlier on. So now we're going over to Dr. Federica Lucivero, who is also a bioethicist from the Wellcome Centre for Ethics and Humanities and the Ethics Centre. Federica, would you like to walk us through the theme of connectedness, please?
Hi, Nina, thank you. And of course I can. And thank you everyone who has joined us today. Well, during this pandemic, we heard a lot about social distancing, and some of us have also discovered that physical distancing is not the same of social disconnection, as we have found ourselves continuously connected with friends, family, and strangers and colleagues through social media and video calls. But does it mean that we were truly connected? So what we have tried to do with this theme in the exhibition was to explore the boundaries of the space between physical distance and social and emotional connection for older people. So the lockdown and the pandemic mean that older people experience new ways of connecting with their families, friends, and communities. For example, older people had to give up with gathering with their friends in clubs or community centers or places of worship. And this has been very hard for them. But in some cases, they've been reached out more by people in their community that have been trying to support the most vulnerable ones by providing meals, checking on them, or just making time for a chit chat on the doorstep. Lockdown also had an impact on people's relationship with their family. For example, older people have often been told what to do or not to do by their children and grandchildren who are very worried about their well-being. So these are all examples of different experiences of social connectedness that older people had during lockdown. And in this context, where social relationships adapted to the new situation, digital technologies have played an interesting role. We often think of older people as being on the wrong end of the spectrum of digital literacy. However, we see incredible resourcefulness in the stories collected by Adam. Many people who were worried about the older members of their families felt the need, for example, to give them devices and teach them how to use them. So what happened is that many older people have been using digital technologies, especially video calling platforms like Zoom or Skype or FaceTime, in order to stay connected to their families. So, for example, grandparents have started reading bedtime stories to their grandchildren. And we heard about people talking about all the Netflix series that they have started to watch after the recommendations of their older grandchildren. And this helped to maintain a sense of community and of continuity and involvement in family life across physical distances. Of course, digital technologies are not a panacea, and we cannot deny that older people have also often experienced firsthand the limits of virtual connection, not only the ones due to physical impairment, due to sight or hearing problems, but also more emotional limits like the sadness of not being able to hug grandchildren waving from across the screen, or the impossibility to reproduce the joy that being a bingo session in a community center can offer to a person. So this is something that we also need to keep in mind when thinking of social connectedness. And it's all from me, Mina. Back to you.
Thank you, Federica. And I think this links in very well, actually, with our next theme of coping. So our next speaker is Dr. Mira Schneiders, a researcher at the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit. Mira is now going to reflect a little on the theme of coping, which is the focus of her research.
Thank you, Nina, and good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to see so many of you here. And I'm going to reflect on coping, which I think many older people have spent a long time during this lockdown and pandemic trying to work out how best to cope with the ongoing restrictions. And for many, keeping safe and minimizing the risks of getting infected with COVID was obviously a key concern. But as we've seen in the last two panels, trying to avoid loneliness and isolation and also staying connected have also been key priorities for many older people during this pandemic. So I just would like to reflect a little bit on two related points on coping. So during this time last year, I was involved in doing some qualitative research seeking to understand the impact of the first lockdown on lived experience of people living in the UK, which also included older people. And reflecting on the findings from this research together with the stories collected by Adam, what really struck me was that many older people have experienced this great tension and conflict between the need to keep safe on the one hand and the need to feel connected on the other hand. And this often created very difficult and sometimes irreconcilable tensions for older people. So for example, I spoke to one older woman in her 80s who lived on her own and also spent lockdown alone. And she told me that she didn't know how much time she had left to live. And because of that, it was really important for her to spend as much time as possible with her family, seeing them in the flesh, and seeing her young grandchildren grow and develop. But because of the lockdown and COVID-related risks, she wasn't able to see her family for a very long time. And so this really left her feeling heartbroken and lonely. And while, of course, during this pandemic, everyone has experienced some degree of this sense of missing out on the things that we find most valuable, I think it's important to keep in mind the different life stages in which we find ourselves during this pandemic. And I think that for many older people, the grief about missing out on important life events like family reunions, travels, births, funerals, religious ceremonies, and so on, have been very poignant because they've had to make particularly difficult trade-offs between coping with a heightened personal risk, but also wanting to make the most of the time that they have left in their lives. And so for many, I think this has led to very difficult and ongoing dilemmas between safety and connectedness. So my final point is about diversity. Older people are very often stereotyped into being vulnerable, frail, and dependent, but actually one of the hallmarks of older age is great diversity in capacity, but also health needs of older people. And again, in my research, I've come across older people who feel very healthy and actually oppose the label of being a high-risk group simply on the basis of their chronological age. And instead, they wish to actively contribute to their communities through voluntary work and supporting others who are more vulnerable. And they actually said that helping others was a really important way for them to cope in this time of adversity, which lots of research has also shown. So in this way, older people's own perceptions about their role in the pandemic may sometimes be in stark contrast to the labels that the risk-based framing of public health messaging can impose on them. So to conclude, I think it's really important to address the barriers that limit older people's ongoing social participation and contributions during this pandemic, while of course balancing this with concerns about their health and safety. And I think the first step in doing that is to go beyond the prevailing stereotypes that older people are vulnerable and frail, and instead to also emphasize their agency in their own lives and in their communities, and to try and better understand what actually they have reason themselves to value, and how we can support them to find a better balance between keeping safe and also continuing to live lives that have meaning and value to them during this ongoing pandemic. Thank you, Nina.
Thanks so much, Mira. That was lovely. And finally, we move to our last speaker, Dr. Rod Bailey. Rod is a historian who is a member of the Wellcome Centre for Ethics and Humanities. His research focuses on the histories of epidemic disease and public health. So Rod, I think of all of us, you're probably best placed to illustrate the theme memories. Thank you, Rod.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks very much. Yeah, I should say at the outset that my work actually overlaps between war and disease. So it's fascinating for me to be part of a project like this where Adam has engaged so meaningfully with people whose memories stretch back deliberately to conflicts of the past and to comparable national crises that they've lived through in previous past years. And I think one of the very striking themes to emerge, I think, from the photographs and from the interviews that Adam's done, are the parallels that have been drawn by many people between the situations that we're faced with today among the older generation, and also how they've perceived similar problems in the past. And we are talking about things which are directly comparable, things like rationing, difficulties with movement, so travel has been very much reduced. There's a great deal of distress and loneliness, and also we're confronted with fear as well, fear for the lives of loved ones, for those, whether that's fear for older relatives who are perhaps more vulnerable, but also fear for relatives who are NHS staff. So older people are certainly reflecting in ways which they think are similar in way, and reflecting on similar features to previous conflicts that we've seen in previous times of national crisis. So I think these are it's fascinating to see these drawn at a distance of 80 years really from the Second World War in particular. At the same time, I think we have to be careful we don't take those, we don't draw too much from those comparisons and from these two different situations. So for example, at the moment, we have been encouraged to believe or invest in the idea of a blitz spirit, where we're coming together as a community in the face of an external enemy. But is really invoking the idea of an enemy, comparing a disease to an enemy, is that a helpful thing to do? Is it even an accurate thing to do? To what extent really is a disease, a pathogen, is that comparable to another nation or a dictatorship or a authoritarian regime trying to destroy another? So there are perhaps differences there that we might want to think about. And we might also want to think about who is it that's encouraging us to think like that, and why are they doing so? So why are we being encouraged to think about that we're in a conflict, that perhaps that there are inspiring moments of the past to help us deal with the present? And are we looking at the right causes of the problems? Should we perhaps be thinking more about, for example, NHS underfunding for decades, or a desire to perhaps distract attention from other problems that we have, such as test and trace programs, which have been haven't worked as well as people had hoped, or the lack of capacity that was built in at the beginning. So we have to think about the aptness, I think, of some of these comparisons as well. And that, again, is what history can encourage us to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Rod, and thank you to all of our speakers. Now, before I open up for questions from our audience, I just want to stress again that the link to the exhibition is now in the chat function. So please do click it open and have a look after the exhibition, after you've asked us some of your questions now. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, and we are particularly interested in questions for our speakers, and if you've been flicking through the exhibition while you've listened to our speakers, maybe your thoughts on the project or your thoughts on the motivations underlying the project. And while the speakers address some of the questions, we're going to hopefully, if the technology works, show you some of Adam's really amazing photographs that he took last spring. So do we have any questions in the chat for the speakers, or thoughts or reflections? Now, I'm looking at the chat function and also the Q&A function, so you can post questions any way you like. And I seem to have one now in the Q&A function, which I will distribute to our speakers. So, given that the UK will soon be emerging from hopefully its final lockdown, the questioner asks, is there a key message that the speakers hope viewers of the exhibition will take away? So can I start maybe with Mikey, because we've not heard from him for a while. So Mikey, is there a key message you hope that viewers of this exhibition will take away? And I'll go around all of you.
Thanks, Nina. Yeah, so I think it's a difficult question. I mean, I think there are a whole range of lessons to think about in relationship to the social context in which we create good lives for older people. And I take it that's what I'm particularly interested in thinking about here, questions of social justice for older people. I think for me, one of the points to emphasize is this possibility of opening up new spaces of social connectedness around our everyday communities. It seems to me that one of the striking features of the pandemic times has been this ability to find new ways of connecting with people close to us. You know, I would standardly walk through my neighborhood and be very self-obsessed, be very self-focused in thinking about what I was doing with my day. There's a sense in which we have this shared purpose, I think, as we go about our lives, to the shops, through the parks, whatever it might be, just walking down the street. There's sort of a way of acknowledging or respecting the people around us because of the sort of sense of shared experience that comes with living at this point in our lives, I think. And I think there's a real opportunity to build and maintain and develop that. And just to pause and experience it for what it is, a new way of connecting in an everyday sense with the people around us. And I think it's quite it's quite an unusual thing for us to do, but something that I found particularly important, and I hope it stays with us.
Thanks, Mikey. I can see these amazing photographs are now flashing past us, and I hope that all of you out there are really enjoying them. Adam, would you like to talk about what you think you hope people take away from your exhibition and your photographs?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's really why I started the project and what inspired me to start, which was seeing people around, you know, during the first lockdown and wondering what their story was. And I think especially at the start of the first lockdown, it was very easy to get sort of into your own story. And going out and realizing, you know, seeing other people and kind of wondering what's going on for them. And I guess that's really the question is, you know, what's going on for you? And just being able to bear that in mind and to acknowledge that it's been a difficult period for everyone for various different reasons. And I mean, as far as a message to take from it, I think it's just to really just to open up to other people's experiences. And yeah, I think that's it really. Thank you.
Thank you. Mira, do you have anything to add maybe? Oh, Mira's disappeared. Federica, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, actually, there are a few things. I mean, I think I will connect to what Adam was just saying. And this was also for me one of the main motivations to get involved in this project, was to see how we have been talking about vulnerable older people as vulnerable people, and how to shelter them, what was the issues that they were going through, and so on. But at the same time, in the most general discourse, the narrative, especially like at the very beginning of the pandemic, I could hear very little voice from these people. And this is what really drew me towards like Adam's work, because he was giving like a face and a voice to these people. And this is, I think, what also this exhibition was trying to do, right? And so in terms of what we can learn from that, I think it's really about listening, but about asking. Something that really struck me in the Penny's, I think like Penny's video is very telling, and it says like very important things at different levels. But one thing that really made me think today was when she says, scientists and politicians, all these people are telling us this and that, and I don't know what to trust or what to believe. And there was this real distance between the ones who make decisions, or the one who interpret the word and tell you what to do, and the one who actually living those decisions. And so I think something that I think probably we should learn is like how to really bridge this gap. And it's something that has been going on forever. Of course, it's not new, but at the same time, it came up like quite, I thought it was like quite striking in this context. And so this, what this exhibition is trying to do is like a first step towards like this this communication and this like bridging this gap between, us, the scientists, or the politicians, and people who are experiencing, this very difficult, challenging situation.
Thanks, Federica. Mira, do you want to add something very quickly on this? Because I have some specific questions for Rod and Adam.
Yes, sure. I think really to echo what Federica said, I think that it's really important to keep in mind that just like any other population, older people are very diverse, and so there will be a range of experiences and views on coming out of the lockdown. Some might really welcome it, and others might feel very concerned and fearful about it. So I think, again, just to echo that message, to ask and to have conversations with older people, to ask them what they feel comfortable with, rather than to assume. So that would be my point.
Yes, and actually we have a comment in the Q&A from Kathy Waters, who's basically says how wonderful she thinks the project is, and she particularly agrees with your earlier comment that we should not just stereotype all older people as vulnerable. So I now have a couple of questions. I have one for Rod from Jeremy Leslie Spinks, and he says, Dr. Bailey's interesting question about why we are constantly encouraged to fixate on such mindsets as blitz spirit emboldens me to ask whether he might have a possible motive for this in mind. So I think this is a little political, this question, Rod. Over to you.
I don't think so. No, I think it's a great question. Thank you, Jeremy, if I may call you that. Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't believe I'm being cynical if I say that it's. I think it's striking that it's been rolled out consistently and from the start, and there's certainly a flavour there for me. At least my impression is that it's there as a way of instilling a feeling of communal feeling, if you like, a communal a sense that we're in this together. But it's not just that. There's something else there as well, that we are supposed to be. We are under attack. That is the implication that there is something out there which is targeting us, and I have a bit of a problem with that, because it does suggest that we're completely faultless in this, and that that everything is external. So I think yes, I do feel that there may be more going on when something like that is rolled out than just a nice warm feeling that is being encouraged on our part. I'll stop there.
Okay, so I now have a question from Joe Farrell for Adam. How many people did you interview, Adam, and over what time period? And have you been following them up over a period of time? And if so, what? If you see what I mean.
Yeah. So I interviewed, I think it was 6 people, and I mean, actually, I haven't been in contact with any of them this year. The last time I spoke to Peggy I spoke to her after that interview. I think she's the one I've been in contact the most. She lives locally as well. And Joe as well. Joe was an old family friend, actually. So I've spoken to him a few times and sent him a photo. I bought a photo he was best friends of my grandparents, and I bought him a photo when I went to do the interview of him with my grandparents, and he wanted a copy of it, so I got one of those made for him. And I had a chat with Rini and with Betty recently, and they're not. I think the progressive lockdowns have really started to take their toll. But I have, as I say, I haven't actually spoken to any of them within the last couple of months, but it's probably about time that I did. So thanks for that.
Okay, and I have one last very quick question from Madeline Atkinson from Mira. And Mira, you're going to have to do this in a couple of words, really, because I have to wrap up in a second. Do you think there needs to be a greater representation of older people in media? And if so, how do you think these could be made more accurate or empowering rather than just adhering to stereotypes? So I think that's difficult to put into a couple of words, but try.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important question. And I think, yes, of course, there needs to be greater representation of older people in media. And I think, you know, in your question, you already addressed the danger that even when we show positive role models, we can move into stereotyping them. So, you know, really just focusing on older people who are very healthy. And we also don't want to do that. Obviously, we want to acknowledge that there's a great range of experience and capacity in older age. But I think particularly highlighting some of the contributions of older people to their communities and their families. For instance, in their role as grandparents, they've had a huge impact in this pandemic supporting grandchildren. And I think those are some of the experiences that really need to be highlighted more in the media. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira, and thank you for everyone for your questions. I think we need to wrap that up there, but please do have a look at our main exhibition online pages, and please get in touch with us via the email address which we've added to the chat a couple of minutes ago. And if you have any further thoughts or questions, and we'd be absolutely delighted to hear from you. And I think you will be receiving a festival feedback form in email from the festival organisers. So this just leaves me to thank our speakers today, Adam Isfendiyar, Peggy Metaxas, Mikey Dunn, Federica Lucivero, Mira Schneiders and Rod Bailey. So it is goodbye from me and the Wellcome Centre for Ethics and Humanities, and an absolutely huge thank you to you for joining us today, and apologies for any technical glitches, but we know that you can look at this amazing exhibition online. Thank you.